Okay, welcome back. So where were we? So what happened? Archaeosporial cell, right? So when enter become mature, the size of microsporangium also become big. Okay, the size of microsporangium cell becomes big and develop to its size, and we start calling microsporangium as what's wrong? Pollen sac. We will not call it as a microsporangium anymore. Okay, when enter become mature, the size of microsporangium become big and we start calling it as a pollen sac, not microsporangium anymore. Okay, now as well as what happened to archaeosporial cell, the archaeosporial cell size also become big and they separate from each other. Okay, the size of archaeosporial cell also grows and they separate from each other, and we will call that cell as a microspore mother cell. Okay, each microspore mother cell is capable of giving rise to microspore tetrad. Now the process I will show you on the left side of it. Okay, and you note it down, all those below of it or on the right side of it. I will show you on the left side of it the process, the actual process that takes place. I will show you on the left side of it. Okay, so what happened when the enter is young, all the archaeosporial cells are small, they remain completely packed with each other, and when the enter become mature, the microsporangium size become big and develops into pollen sac, as well as the archaeosporial cells grows to its size and separates from each other and form microspore tetrad. Now what happened microspore tetrad? After this I will show the process at that side. Okay, and you write it down below or right side of your paper. So let me show you one microspore mother cell. So what happened? This is microspore mother cell. Inside there is a nucleus. Okay, so microspore mother cell, in short form we write it as a MMC, and their diploid cell. Okay, all this process takes place inside the pollen sac at the same time. Okay, to all pollen sac, but I will show you one particular diagram of it. So microspore under cell, what happened? Undergo one meiotic division. It undergo one meiotic division and develops microspore tetrad. This dot is a nucleus. Okay, microspore tetrad. Tetrad means 4 in number. Okay, microspore 4 in number. Di, mono, di, tri, tetra. Right? So 4 in number. 1, 2, 3, and another one is on behind of it. I cannot show you in this diagram. That just imagine there is behind of it. So all those microspore are attached with each other for some time. Okay, and we call it as a microspore tetrad. All are haploid. Okay, so 4 microspore attached for some time with each other, we call that structure as a microspore tetrad. All right, so microspore mother cell undergo one meiotic division, that is meiosis, one meiotic division, and produce microspore tetrad. Now next what happened? You continue. Okay, I will draw that side. So microspore tetrad, now it will separate, they will degenerate from each other. So each microspore tetrad degenerates from each other. Who help in degeneration of microspore tetrad? Which cell? Tapetum. Because tapetum produce what enzyme? Calase enzyme. Okay, they help in the degeneration of Calase enzyme. Okay, because all those microspore mother cell are attached with the help of a sticky substance produced by endothecium known as callus. Remember structure of callus. Those sticky structure are ruptured with the help of an enzyme known as callus produced by tapetum. Remember? Okay. Now all those microspore are attached for some time and they degenerate and separate from each other, and we call it as a microspores. All are haploid microspores. We call it as a microspores. Okay. Now what happened? This microspore undergo one mitotic division, that is mitosis division takes place. So it will undergo one mitotic division and finally it will produce pollen grains. It will produce pollen grains. Okay. Now the actual structure of pollen grains has two layers. Pollen grain has two layers. The inner layer is known as intine and it has outer layer. Outer layer is hard and very resistant. Let me show you. Okay, let me draw that side. Okay. You continue. You keep on continuing your notes. Okay, let me show you that side. Let me show the structure of pollen grain. So after one mitotic division, it will produce pollen grains. The pollen grain has two layers. The outer layer and the inner layer. The outer layer is very hard and it is made up of sporopollenin. Okay, so it has two layers, the inner and the outer. The inner layer is known as intine, I-N-T-I-N-E. In means inside, intine. It is made up of cellulose. The outer layer is very hard and extremely resistant substance. This is exine. And it is made up of sporopollenin. Okay, it is made up of sporopollenin, which is a very highly resistant substance we have discussed. It is produced by tapetum. Okay, the inner layer is known as intine, made up of cellulose. The outer layer is known as exine, made up of sporopollenin. Now inside there is a nucleus. Inside the cell, what happened? The nucleus division takes place. The nucleus divides into two. Okay, one small nucleus which float inside the cell and one big nucleus which is spindle shape inside the cell. Okay, so nucleus divides into two. One small nucleus is known as vegetative nucleus. Okay, and the bigger one is known as generative nucleus. So this is the actual structure of pollen grain, which is male gametophyte. Okay, the pollen grain has two layers, intine, which is inside. It is made up of cellulose, and outer layer exine, which is made up of sporopollenin, and the nucleus divides into two. One small nucleus is known as vegetative nucleus and the another one is known as generative nucleus. Okay, so this is the overall process of microsporogenesis. Okay, let me repeat. What happened? When the anther is young, the archosporial cells are small and compactly packed with each other. Okay, When anther become mature, the microsporangium develops and grows to its size and develop into pollen sac. As well as the archaeosporial cell also become big and separates from each other and develop microspore mother cell. Alright, the microspore mother cell undergo one meiotic division and produce microspore tetrad. Okay, the microspore tetrad will separate from each other with the help of an enzyme calase, okay, and produce microspore. The microspore will undergo one mitotic division and produce pollen grains. Okay, the pollen grain has two layers. Inner layer known as intine, it is made up of cellulose, and the outer layer known as exine, and it is made up of sporopollenin. Okay, and the nucleus divides into two, one small nucleus known as vegetative nucleus and one bigger nucleus known as generative nucleus. Okay, now this generative nucleus, it takes part in reproduction. It fuses with female reproductive organ inside the ovule. Okay, the vegetative cell, they produce pollen tube. Okay, the tube is produced. We will see that structure in next topic during fertilization. The vegetative cells or nucleus is responsible for formation of pollen tube. A tube emerges out, okay, and enters into the female reproductive organ, and the fusion takes place with generative cell. All right, so this is the overall structure of pollen grains. Now one more term, so the outer layer is made up of what? Exine, which is a highly resistant substance. It is unbreakable, okay, highly resistant, it is unbreakable. Now if this has to comes out for fusion, if generative nucleus has to comes out from this cell for fusion with female, how they will comes out? With the help of formation of tube. This nucleus will form a tube through that space. Can you see that space present between? Okay, those spaces are known as germ pores. Because why we cannot comes out through exine? Because it is made up of sporopollenin, which is unbreakable. That's why they will comes out through this space, okay, through germ pores. We will see that in a different topic during fertilization. Okay, now what are the changes that takes place inside the anther? Now this microspore will develop into, first microspore mother cell will develop into microspore tetrad. So this is a rough diagram for you to understand. Okay, it will develop into microspore tetrad, and this microspore tetrad will give rise into pollen grains. Pollen grains, it will give rise to pollen grains. So I am showing you the only rough diagram for you to understand, but all these changes takes place at what particular time? Okay, not separately, not like this. All these changes takes place at the same time in all the microsporangium, not at the different microsporangium. All these changes takes place at the same time at the same microsporangium, to all the microsporangia. Okay, not to the different microsporangia, but for us to understand, we do like that. Okay, so once they form pollen grains, these pollen grains will comes out from those microsporangium, and then when the anther is mature, those cells, the layers at the point of adhesion, this point of adhesion, through that point of adhesion, those pollen grains will comes out through pollination, through the process pollination. Okay, once the pollen grain is produced, they will comes out from the microsporangia, that is they will comes out from the pollen sac, and these layers, that is at the point of adhesion, ruptures, okay, and they comes out from anther. That is the process. Okay, understood? So let me give you a quick revision of it. Microsporogenesis. What is microsporogenesis? The process of formation of microspore, that is male gamete, that is pollen grain. Okay, so when the anther is young, all the archaeosporial cells are small and compactly packed with each other inside the sporangium. Now when anther become mature, all the archaeosporial cell develops to its size, grows to its size, and they separate from each other and form microspore mother cell. Okay, the microspore mother cell will undergo one meiotic division and produce microspore tetrad. The microspore tetrad separates from each other and produce a microspore. The microspore undergo one mitotic division and produce pollen grains. Okay, and the pollen grain has two layers, the inner layer intine made up of cellulose, the outer layer exine made up of sporopollenin. And the nucleus divides into vegetative nucleus and generative nucleus. The generative nucleus takes part in reproduction. The vegetative nucleus is responsible for formation of pollen tube. That's it. That is the overall process of microsporogenesis. Okay, understood? Okay, let me explain one very last time. So microsporogenesis. Okay, we have discussed the overall process of microsporogenesis. Let me explain one last time. So what is microsporogenesis? The process of formation of microspore is known as microsporogenesis. Alright, so what happened? When the anther is young, all the archaeosporial cells are small and they are compactly packed with each other inside the microsporangium. Alright, now when the anther become mature, the microsporangium grows to its size and form pollen sac, as well as the cells of archaeosporial cells also grows to its size and separates from each other and develops microspore mother cell. Okay, now the microspore mother cell will undergo one meiotic division and produce microspore tetrad. Now the microspore tetrads will separate from each other with the help of an enzyme Kales and produce microspores. Okay, now these microspores will undergo one mitotic division and produce pollen grains, okay, which is a male gamete. The pollen grain has two layers, inner layer known as intine made up of cellulose and outer layer known as exine made up of sporopollenin. Okay, and the nucleus of microspore divides into two. Okay, one small nucleus known as vegetative nucleus, which is responsible for formation of pollen tube. Okay, and a bigger nucleus known as generative nucleus, which takes part in a reproduction. So that's it. This is the overall process of microsporogenesis. Now pollen grains is produced. Okay, it is ready to take part into the reproduction process. It is ready to fuse with a female reproductive organ. Okay, pollen tube. A tube emerges out from this cell. We will discuss this during fertilization topic. Okay, a tube emerges out from the germ pore. Okay, Now this happens inside the anther, okay, and will emerges out. It will comes out from the anther wall. Okay, when anther become mature, all these cells become fiber. Okay, it become fiber, and it will degenerates. The pollen grain will release out of the cell and will go into the female reproductive organ through stigma. It will come down into the ovule inside the ovary, and the fusion will take place. Okay, so these are the overall process of microsporogenesis. Now there are some few terms that you need to remember. I want you to write it down by yourself. I have discussed everything, I have said it everything. I want you to draw, okay, draw all those processes and write it down. Drawing on the right side, writing part on the left side. Your writing parts should be with respect to your diagram. Okay, please mention diagram. If question asks, if question asks, it will come for 5 marks. So diagram is required. Okay, there are some few important terms that you need to know about pollen grains. So how pollen grains is produced, we have seen. Okay, and there are some few important terms that we need to know, that in most angiosperm, okay, in most angiosperm, the pollen grain released at 2-cell stage. Remember, in most angiosperm, the pollen grains released at 2-cell stage. Next, what we need to know, study of pollen grains are called as palynology. Okay, remember, the study of pollen grains are called as palynology. Okay, remember, sometimes the question asks for 1 mark, palynology. Next, now pollen grains can be edible. Okay, pollen grains are edible in the form of syrups and tablets. It is given to the children and athletes for their growth. Okay, pollen grains are edible in the form of, write by yourself, in the form of syrups and tablets. Okay, it provide nutrition. Okay, huge amount of nutrition it provides, pollen grains, and it is edible in the form of syrups and tablet. Nutrient rich supplement, it is given to the children and athlete. Okay, write by yourself. Next important thing, what else? Some people are allergic to pollen grains. Okay, there are some people which are allergic to pollen grain. So some people that are allergic to pollen grain, the allergy of pollen grain are known as hay fever, Hay. Okay, remember, these are some important terms that you need to remember. So pollen grain release at 2-cell stage. Study of pollen grains under palynology. Then pollen grains are edible in the form of syrups and tablets. They provide nutrient rich supplement to children and athlete. Okay, and some people which are allergic to pollen grain, they are called as hay fever. So these are the overall process of microsporogenesis we have discussed. Okay, I want you to write it down in your copy along with the diagram. Okay, once the class gets open, I will check your copy, all your copy. So remember. Okay, so with this we have completed the process of microsporogenesis. Next we will discuss the structure of female reproductive organ, that is ovule, in next video. Okay, stay home, stay safe.